Yeah, welcome back to my class again today. Today we are going to look at object-oriented programming proper. The last class, I gave you an introduction and the difference between object-oriented and procedural language. I told you that procedural programming is still existing, but it's behind the scene. Why the object-oriented is now what you are seeing at the front end, in which we are using to create or design applications. So today we are still on OOP, which is what? Object oriented programming, right? So this is what we are going to look at. And I told you in the last class that there are four concepts, right? At least for now, that I will show you that I'm going to use to explain this. And the first one is what? Class. The second one is what? Object. The third one is what? Method. And the fourth one is what? Attribute. Okay, so these are the four concepts that I'm going to use to teach you object-oriented programming. Now, the first one, which is this one, what is it? This is a blueprint of an object. A blueprint of this. Now, what do I mean by a blueprint? Let's take, for example, you want to build a house. So an architect will have to design the blueprint, that is the architectural design. That is the blueprint. Now, you now take the architectural design and give it to an engineer who is now going to build the house. So, the house itself is the object, what, of the class. So, the class is the blueprint from which this object will come out from. So, this object is what? An instance of the class. This is a blueprint of the object, while object is an instance of what? The class. Okay. In my last video, last class, I told you that we are going to use the concept of family, right, to explain object-oriented programming. Now I have also given you another example, which is what? The building of a house. So we have the architectural design, and then we have the house itself. So the architectural design is the class, while the house itself is the object. Isn't that so? Now, in the case of a family, this family is what? The class. And every child given birth to in that family becomes an object of the class. So every child represents an object of the family, while the family is the class. Now, what is a method? I can actually say, if I want to do an analogy of this method, I can say that method is like what? In the other programming, in procedural, this method is actually what you call functions, right? Why this attribute is actually what you refer to as variables, right? That is what this is, function. This is variable. I told you when I was giving an analogy of the what? The example of the Tower of Babel. I told you that each of the people represented functions when they were together. But when the languages changed, they were no longer representing functions. Each of them was now representing an object of the class because segmentalization came in. So we now have different people with different languages, right? Now, in this case, the class is the blueprint of an object. An object is the instance of the class. And I've told you that using a family represents class. Now, every child of the family, right, from the family represent what? The object of the class. Now, method are like thought, right? Thought. And these attributes are like are what? The data. What you are going to mix with the thought in order to create a behavior. So this one and this will give you what? Behavior. So it therefore means that these two, right, or this is inside this class. So this class is a container that is housing this method and this attribute. Then the object that will be created from this class is simply going to implement these two that is inside here. That is why it is an instance. So what am I saying? What I'm simply saying is that every family have what you call behavior in it, which is what? Method, that is functions, and attribute, which is data, right? Defined in the family. Now, every child that is born into that family is simply going to implement the behaviors that are inside this family. So, warning, if you see anybody in your family who is exhibiting a particular type of behavior that you think is bad, you don't have to condemn that person and push the person out. Why? Because that behavior, as long as you are part of that family, is also in you. The only problem or your only saving grace is that you've not come into contact with whatever is going to what trigger that behavior in you. So you have to play the role of an intercessor. We will come to understand how you can actually alter the beast behavior within the family, such that even when you call the behavior, the implementation, right, will be a different outcome. We will come to that as we go on. But have it at the back of your mind that every child that is born into a family is simply going to implement the behaviors that are in that family. For example, you sit down with somebody to play a game. Let's say you are playing chess game. Your opponent, in your mind, what your opponent is simply doing is what? Is scattering the game, while you are arranging the game. That is basically it. But you cannot arrange that game outside the framework of all the skills, right, that are involved in that game. So you must have read it. So you are just simply implementing the knowledge that are in the game. That is what you are doing. So every behavior of a child is simply what is available within the family. So an object is an instance of what? Of a class. Method is a function that is inside the class. Attribute is a variable that is inside the class. Now, once you supply value, once you create an object from this class, then you supply value to this variable, which is the state of that object. Now, this object will now be able to operate based on the value that has been supplied to it in calling this method to work on it. That is actually what you call behavior. So this is the beauty of object-oriented programming, that method and attribute are encapsulated in a class such that every object of the class will implement the method and the attribute based on the value that is supplied. That is the simple summary of object-oriented programming. So that is what I want to share with you in this class today. So in the next class, we are going to create a class, an object, method, and attribute. And you practically see how it works, even on the PyCharm. So till we see in the next class, bye-bye.